Hello, I'm Paul Pluta and welcome to Paul Pluta Prestige. Today I'd like to talk about the Rolex Oyster Quartz. That's 17013 and that's the two-tone Oyster Quartz. And I really love the Rolex numbering system. Sometimes the numbering system gets a bit skew, but if you look at this here, the 17, that tells you it's an Oyster Quartz. The standard automatics were 16, and at the same time period it was a 16013. That would have been the two-tone. And the Oyster Quartz is 17013, two-tone Oyster Quartz. And so there is a bit of, method to the madness. Other times the number system doesn't mean anything like that. But yeah, it's quite an interesting model. The Oyster Quartz itself, it's a huge popular watch for Rolex. And I've got to say it, although Quartz is quite shunned these days, it was a significant model at the time. And I mean, this is the whole thing. Rolex needed a quartz-based piece to have there. I mean, quartz was very in. It was computer age, it was really trendy to have a quartz piece. And although it's heavily shunned now, the whole industry nearly collapsed, and Rolex needed a quartz piece. Makers like Patek had quartz pieces. Audemars had pieces, and Vacheron had quartz. So I mean, it's not as terminal as it sounds. So I mean, don't think that quartz is a cheap solution. This was a highly engineered, highly developed piece, and it's fascinating to see these pieces that are no longer made. And there is a bit of a genre of Oyster Quartz collectors because they are so unique. It's got that beautiful integrated bracelet, and it's also it's very much, it's got the styling cues, very 70s, and it's also it's a piece that was very important to Rolex at the time. And the Oyster Quartzes themselves, they're quite collectible. Some people really love them, and as I've said, the problem is that if something goes wrong with them, you've got to send it to Rolex, and it can be quite an expensive thing to fix. It's like any of these high-end luxury watches. If something goes wrong with a quartz one, it's not something a watchmaker can normally repair, that you've got to replace the circuit. So it can be an expensive fix. That's unfortunately the case there. But I've got to say, the two-tone in the Oyster Quartz, it's probably the most popular in its time period. And in the 70s and 80s, two-tone could do no wrong. And you can see why it's so popular, because it had the class, it had the yellow gold and the steel. It was just really, it's something that it came out, and it just was so popular. And I suppose it's in some ways now two-tones a bit on the outer, and it's a bit of a shame, because I do love, I think it's a great concept. It allows you to mix things in with your dressing. That means with two-tone, you could technically have a white gold wedding ring, and you could have a yellow gold fountain pen. It just mixes in there. So it's a great tool like that. But I've got to say, the two-tone Oyster Quartz, it's a stunner. It's a stunner. I really like them, and they're a very well-regarded piece, and it's easy to see why. And I think these pieces here will get more collectible as time goes on. They were made in limited numbers, and I think the two-tones, they ran until about 2000, 2001, 2002. So they're quite a they had a reasonable production run, but they certainly haven't been on the market for at least 10 years. So I think collectability-wise, they've got some scope there. If you like them, they're an interesting piece. They're an interesting variation to have there. And I think that's a great thing. Okay, let's look at the scoring. We're going to give it a 7 for the brand. The significance of this model in that brand's range, I'm going to give it an 8. For the movement itself, I'm going to give it an 8. The workmanship and finish of this piece, I'm going to give it an 8. And finally, the poor Pluta Prestige rating, I'm going to give it a 7. Total it all up, 38 points for the Rolex two-tone 17013 Oyster Quartz.